Hello, everyone. Pastor George here with today's episode of A New Thing. And I want to just take a kind of a quick episode to talk about something that I found pretty fascinating as I was preparing everything for the stuff on Job this week. It's interesting, but not compelling enough to put in this sermon because it's kind of just a linguistic fun fact. But I also thought it would be kind of interesting, and because these videos are, I just put them together for kind of fun, and they allowed me to talk about random stuff that I thought we'd talk about this. So let me just bring it up real quick, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So let me get my screen pulled up here. There we go. Oh, it's tiny. 1 second. Perfect. All right. So I want to talk about a specific Hebrew word that's used, and it's used a lot in the Old Testament, and a very important phrase here. But the way that Job uses this word is interesting, or the way it's used in the book of Job is an interesting thing that kind of even hints at the narrative itself. So it's not going to make sense until we get a little farther into it, because I know that, like, as far as I'm aware, I'm the only one who knows is in, big quotes here. Like, I knew it much better when I was in school. It's kind of been more and more lost to me as I've used it less, but the one who studied Hebrew, I'll say studied Hebrew, knows Hebrew is way too strong of a word for my level of knowledge and familiarity with the language. But if we're looking at this, right, this is the beginning, so you'll recognize this from what I read on Sunday. So in verse 5, so it's describing everything Job did, has him as this character who's perfect, right? Okay, so it says, and when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings according to the number of them all. He's making sacrifices for his children. For Job said, it may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. So you see that cursed God, right? This pops up quite a bit. We go down a little bit more. We see the first interaction between Satan and God. And in verse 10, Satan says, have you not put a hedge around him? So protection. And his house and all that he has on every side. You have blessed the work of his hands and his possessions, and you have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. So this is actually a really helpful way of looking at this. So let me show you the Hebrew down in verse 10. So you can see I have the interlinear on to helpfully show you the translation, and you're going to see that, this difference. And not you put a fence around he and around his house and around all that he has from all around the work, and bless his hands. So this word, right, berachat here. So Hebrew is what we call an abjad language, which means that the words are formed usually out of 3 core letters, and these letters will take different vowels to sometimes be used as different parts of a sentence, but the core remains the same. So you can see the core right here. It's bet, resh, chet, and so that would be barach, which is to bless. And so the certain form it has here, because it's a verb form, it's a berachat, so you have blessed. And livestock in the land, so just remember bless, right? So it's blessed, it's a positive thing. And on the other hand, you stretch out your hand and touch all that he has. If not, to your face, el pnei atah, he will berachet, right? So bless you, but you'll notice it says curse you down there, but it's the same word. Now that's actually not true generally. Like, curse can be another word as well in Hebrew, but in the book of Job, in the references that we have, when it says like curse someone, it's the word for bless, and that's kind of interesting, right? I think it's interesting. Like, why is that the case, right? So in verse 11, right, that's where it is. So you have a positive verse use of it in verse 10, then you have a negative verse use of it in verse 11. You go down to 21. This is again where Job uses this word, and it's used in the positive sense, right? So let's see. Naked, he said, and came out from the new womb naked from my mother, and naked return there. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes. The name of the Lord be blessed, and you see that again, Barak. So it's used positively there, right? Not cursing God. Into verse 5, right? But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Right? That's what Satan says. And here again, you can see he uses the word to bless. 2 verse 9, chapter 2:9, right? This is probably the most famous one. It's where I got the title for this video that you're watching. His wife is talking to him, right? So she says, and say to he, his wife, you still keep hold to your blamelessness, bless God and die. Right? And so, curse God. Right? Barak. It's the same form that we saw earlier, actually. So, what's going on with this, right? This isn't the only times, like, just at the beginning. I'll just show you one other time, or two other times. So, if his body, if his body has not blessed me, and if he has not warmed with the fleece of my sheep, right? Here you can see it's used again. It's used there in the positive. And then here in 42:12, this is at the very end, right? And the Lord blessed Barak, Job, right? Positive sense. So why is it being used negatively and positively? Like, what's going on there? Well, let's just take a second to remember the overall story of the book of Job. So what Satan wants him... Actually, you know what? Let's just go to the verse. I like 2:9, but that's like my... Yeah, maybe that's too easy. Let's go to 2:11. I know it's right there, but it's easier. Because this is where it comes down to that. So, remember, the whole tension at the center of the book of Job is, okay, what are we going to do about... how can Satan get Job to curse God? Right, that's what he wants him to do. And so what is this being? This is a odd way of basically even showing in the construction of the story, right, of the narrative, that the author who's recounting this is using kind of a ironic use of this word. Now, this isn't the only place that Barak is used like this. It's not just in the book of Job, although like it's most interesting when it's used there. So this is a cool thing, right? I can pull up the word, and you can see like out of the 326 times this word is used in the Old Testament, 290 of them mean blessed. So, and even if you look at like the other ones, you know, may bless, will bless, has blessed, those who blessed, everyone who's blessed. So if you count up all of those, you probably get like into the 300s, right? The biggest one, I think, that's obvious that it forms a part of it, that out of this big wheel of translation options, is the word for curse, which is 7 of the 326. And a lot of, you know, you can see 3 of those come from the book of Job. We looked at that. But you can see it's also used in the poetry of the Psalms. For the wicked boasts and desires of his soul, and the one greedy gains curses and renounces the Lord. 1 Kings 21:3, Naboth cursed God. 1 Kings 21:10, you have cursed God. So the interesting thing here, right, is, okay, why is this happening here? And why does the author of Job use it this way? And why do these authors use it that way? Well, you can see that this is kind of a euphemistic or a I can't remember exactly there's like antinomic. There's like a special term for this sort of thing. Well, it's like when you take a word that is the opposite meaning and use it to describe something. So like think of like, you know, Little John from Robin Hood is a good example of this, right? He's called Little John even though he's huge. And that's kind of using that word in an ironic sense. Antinomic. I want to say it's something like that is the word that's used. You could probably Google it and find the actual word. I'm probably way off. But the reason that it's used is there's a theological reason and there's that kind of ironic reason. Because in the book of Job, it's like, okay, well, you the whole time, right, that the goal is to curse God. But even in the text itself, God is being blessed. And people understand, like, what's happening. It doesn't make sense if the narrative is like, oh, you know, he will bless you to your face. Like, that's not what's going on. And you can see in the other places that this is a euphemism that's used to ignore or to get around the writing curse God into the text itself. So instead of saying, it's kind of basically a show of piety, right? That you don't want to insult God even in the writing of the text. So you're not going to say curse God in the Bible. You're going to rely on your readers to understand that when you use bless in that instance, it actually really means curse, which is kind of interesting, right? But I think that shows how careful the construction was in a lot of these places on how we want to use or how these words were used by their authors. And I think it's interesting that in the book of Job itself, you do see the ultimate kind of how it's going to work out, because even in the words that Satan uses, God can't help to be blessed. And that's kind of one of the overarching themes is that how God is in control and in power over the universe, right? We talked about this yesterday in Bible study, and how he's going to use this in order to glorify himself. And so even in the cursing of God in this book, it's blessed because there's an overall benefit that's happening here. So it's kind of just an interesting thing about the book of Job, right? It's kind of fascinating to me anyways, as a language nerd. And I wanted to take a look at it because we so rarely get to kind of dive in, and like, I don't think sermons are necessarily the best and time to use to talk about Hebrew stuff, but this is like perfect time to use that. So that's what I just wanted to talk about today. Nothing too exciting or fancy. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday, and I'll see you on Sunday to worship when we talk about the Psalms. Peace out.